He pulled her over without cause, asked where she belonged, and demanded answers. But when she calmly showed him her badge, the officer realized he had just profiled the very person who polices his own department. The evening sun had just slipped below the horizon in Toledo, Ohio, leaving the streets lined with soft orange traces that clung to the tops of houses. The quiet stretch of Dorr Street was nearly empty. Only one car rolled steadily through the neighborhood, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. Officer Brian Ketteridge sat in his cruiser a block away, leaning back with one hand on the wheel and the other drumming against his thigh. He had been on the force for almost 15 years, but his reputation wasn't built on restraint. He was known among his colleagues for snapping at people during traffic stops, his temper often showing faster than his badge. When he spotted the sedan, something in him tightened. "Doesn't look like someone from around here," he muttered to himself, his jaw grinding as he flicked on his headlights and began to follow. Inside the car was Dr. Renata Hollis, a woman in her late 40s with a calm presence that came from years of professional discipline. She had spent most of her career investigating misconduct, watching men in uniform justify actions that never should have happened. Tonight, she was simply driving home after visiting her sister. Her mind was already shifting toward what she'd cook for dinner and whether she had the energy to finish reading the file that sat on her kitchen counter. But the red and blue lights in her rearview mirror snapped her thoughts into sharp focus. Renata slowed, signaled, and pulled neatly to the curb. She placed her hands on the steering wheel, steady and deliberate, waiting. Ketteridge approached the driver's side window with heavy steps, each one meant to project authority. His flashlight cut across the inside of her car, even though there was enough streetlight to see. "License and registration," he said flatly, not offering any explanation. Renata turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes without flinching. "May I ask what I'm being stopped for, officer?" Her voice was calm, measured, but there was steel beneath the courtesy. Ketteridge's mouth twisted. He wasn't used to being questioned this quickly. "We've had reports of suspicious vehicles in the area," he said, the excuse rolling off his tongue without effort. "Mind telling me where you're headed?" Renata handed him her license and registration before speaking again. "Headed home. Is there a specific violation you observed?" Instead of answering, Ketteridge shined his light directly onto her face, letting it linger a beat too long. "Just doing my job. A lot of break-ins lately. People want us keeping an eye out." Renata kept her gaze steady. "And you believe I look like someone involved in those break-ins?" Her question wasn't loud, but it cut through the stale evening air like a blade. Ketteridge shifted, clearing his throat. "Ma'am, I'm asking the questions here." The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. Renata didn't look away, didn't reach for her phone, didn't shuffle nervously in her seat the way so many others might. She just sat there, hands still on the wheel, her breathing even. That composure seemed to unsettle Ketteridge more than anger ever could. "Step out of the car," he finally ordered. Renata didn't move immediately. She let the request hang for a moment, almost as if she were giving him space to rethink it. But when she did open the door, she did so with grace, standing on the sidewalk with her shoulders squared. "What exactly are you looking for, Officer Ketteridge?" she asked, her tone still even but edged now with quiet authority. Ketteridge frowned at the sound of his own name. He hadn't introduced himself. "How do you know my name?" Renata raised an eyebrow but didn't answer that. Instead, she watched him scan her car with exaggerated suspicion. He opened the back door, peering inside as if expecting to find something that would justify the stop. But the car was spotless. "You live around here?" he pressed. "I work here," she replied smoothly, "and I believe you've made your assumptions clear enough." Ketteridge bristled. The way she spoke, it wasn't defensive, it wasn't submissive. It was measured, almost like she was observing him more than engaging with him. For a brief second, he felt like the spotlight was on him instead of her, but he wasn't about to back down, not yet. Ketteridge stood there, the weight of the badge on his chest feeling heavier than usual. The quiet neighborhood pressed in around him, porch lights glowing, curtains shifting as a few residents peeked out, curious about the flashing lights parked along their street. He hated being watched like this, especially when he wasn't sure what he'd even write in the report later. Renata, still standing on the curb, didn't fill the silence. She let it stretch, and that silence felt louder than words. "So," Ketteridge said, finally breaking it, "where exactly are you headed tonight?" She gave a short, controlled breath. "Home. I told you that already." "Where's home?" he pressed, his flashlight still trained on her even though he didn't need it anymore. Renata glanced at the beam, then back at him. "Officer, you have my license. My address is printed clearly. Do you have reason to believe I've committed an offense?" The way she said it wasn't just calm, it was precise. Each word landed with intent. Ketteridge didn't like it. "Look, I'm not here to argue with you," he snapped. "I'm just trying to do my job. You're in an area where we don't see a lot of people like you after dark." The phrasing hung in the air like smoke. She heard it. He knew she heard it. Renata tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "People like me? Would you care to explain what you mean?" Ketteridge shifted his weight. He hadn't meant to say it quite that bluntly, but pride wouldn't let him walk it back. "I mean, people I don't recognize, driving expensive cars, circling neighborhoods where there have been problems. That clear enough?" For the first time, Renata allowed a small smile. It wasn't amused, it was knowing. "Yes, very clear." Her composure made him itch. Most people cracked under pressure. They rambled, grew defensive, stumbled over explanations. She was giving him nothing. "Why don't you tell me what brought you through this neighborhood specifically?" he asked, leaning closer now, trying to find an angle. "I visited my sister on Bancroft Street," she replied, unshaken. "She had surgery last week. I stayed to help her with dinner. Would you like her phone number to confirm?" Her answer was steady, almost too neat. Ketteridge didn't want confirmation. He wanted control. "That won't be necessary," he muttered, taking a step back. Still, he couldn't help himself. He pushed further. "Mind popping the trunk?" Renata's voice sharpened, though she never raised it. "Do you have probable cause?" Her question stopped him. The way she phrased it, the precision of her tone. It wasn't the voice of someone unfamiliar with the law. "I don't need cause if I have suspicion," he shot back, though even as he said it, his stomach twisted. Renata's eyes didn't waver. "Suspicion has to be reasonable. Yours isn't." The exchange felt different now. For the first time, Ketteridge felt like he wasn't leading the conversation. She was. Each answer pinned him down, turned the spotlight back on him. His radio crackled faintly, but he ignored it. He wasn't finished here. "You sound like you've rehearsed this," he sneered. "I don't rehearse my rights, officer," Renata said. "I know them." The words stung more than he expected. He tugged at his vest, frustration heating his face. "You think you're smarter than me?" Renata didn't blink. "I think you're testing the limits of your authority, and I'm giving you the chance to reconsider." For a split second, he hesitated. Her choice of words wasn't accidental. It was as if she were giving him an off-ramp, an opportunity to let the stop end without humiliation. But his pride wouldn't take it. "You've got an answer for everything, don't you?" he said, almost gritting his teeth. "I have experience," she replied. "That's all." Behind them, a porch light clicked on across the street. A man stepped outside, folding his arms, pretending to check his mailbox while stealing glances at the scene. Others were watching now too. That only fueled Ketteridge's determination to assert control. "You're stalling," he barked. "Empty your pockets." Renata raised both hands slightly from her sides, her movements deliberate, cautious. "Is that an official order?" "It is." Her eyes narrowed just enough to show she was weighing her next move. Then slowly, she reached into her blazer pocket, not hurried, not defensive, and pulled out her phone, holding it where he could see. "This is what I carry. A phone." Her other hand went to her purse, which rested on the passenger seat. "And my wallet. Would you like to check it again?" The way she offered it wasn't submission. It was strategy. Every step she took made it harder for him to claim she was resisting. For Ketteridge, it felt like sand slipping through his fingers. Every command, every attempt to dominate, was being answered with control he couldn't break. But what she hadn't revealed yet was the part that would shake him the most. The night air felt heavier now, like the street itself was holding its breath. Renata stood tall under the street lamp, her calm presence making Ketteridge look like the one under inspection. The cruiser's lights kept flashing, painting red and blue across the quiet houses. A few blinds twitched, more eyes were watching. Ketteridge tightened his grip on his flashlight, though he no longer needed it. "I don't like the way you're talking to me," he said, his voice sharp. Renata's response was quiet but firm. "I'm not here to make you comfortable, officer. I'm here because you pulled me over without cause." Her words hit him harder than he wanted to admit. He stepped closer, his boots scraping against the pavement. Lady, you think you're tough? You think talking circles around me is going to help you? It's not. Renata didn't budge. I don't need to talk circles. I only need to answer what's required. Nothing more. Ketteridge's jaw clenched. He hated this. Hated the way she wasn't folding the way others did. No excuses, no nervous chatter, no plea to be let off easy. Just steadiness. Why don't you tell me what you really do for work? He asked, almost daring her. I already did, she replied evenly. I said I was visiting my sister, but since you're asking again, I'll remind you. I work in law enforcement. He smirked, shaking his head. Law enforcement? Don't tell me you're a cop. Renata didn't answer. Instead, she let the silence hang again. That silence got under his skin. He leaned forward, just enough to try to tower over her. You? A cop? Please, don't waste my time. Renata's eyes flickered to his badge, then back to his face. Is this the way you speak to everyone you stop, or just the ones you don't recognize in certain neighborhoods? Her words landed with precision, sharper than any insult. He opened his mouth to fire back, but nothing came out. Renata stepped a fraction closer, her voice lowering but carrying more weight. I'm asking you one more time, Officer Ketteridge. What is the official reason for this stop? The use of his name again made his stomach tighten. He hadn't given it. He hadn't written it anywhere she could see. And yet she knew. His pride was now tangled with confusion. He forced a scoff, trying to cover the crack. You sound like a lawyer, that it? One of those attorneys who thinks she can tell us how to do the job? Renata shook her head slightly. No, but I've seen enough officers try to justify actions they couldn't defend. You're putting yourself in that position right now. The words pressed against him like a mirror held up too close. For the first time, he felt sweat gather beneath his collar. Watch how you talk to me, he warned, though his voice didn't sound as steady as before. Watch how you carry out your duty, she returned. The tension between them was sharp enough to slice through the night. Renata wasn't yelling, wasn't posturing. She was simply holding her ground with the kind of composure that didn't just resist his control, it reversed it. Ketteridge glanced at the nearby porch again. The man who'd been checking his mailbox was still there, now leaning casually against the railing, phone in hand. A neighbor recording? Maybe. That thought made his throat tighten further. He turned back to Renata, his voice low but shaky. You think you can stand there and make me look like a fool? Renata didn't flinch. You don't need my help to do that. The remark landed like a hammer. His face flushed hot, but he knew she hadn't said it for insult's sake. It was matter of fact, like a surgeon explaining an incision. Ketteridge stepped back, trying to regain some distance, but Renata's calm had already filled the space. She wasn't shrinking, and that was new to him. Most people, by this point, would be trembling, apologizing, doing anything to smooth things over. She was doing the opposite, making him justify every word he spoke. The power dynamic had begun to tilt, and though he couldn't put his finger on why, he felt it slipping fast. But the real storm was coming, the moment she revealed who she truly was. Ketteridge rubbed his palm against his vest, trying to quiet the nerves crawling up his chest. The air felt tighter now. The flashing lights no longer looked like his shield, but like a spotlight, and he was the one trapped inside it. Renata stood in front of him with her shoulders square, her voice steady, her silence louder than his threats. He hated how she held the ground without lifting a finger, without raising her voice. He tried to take control again. All right, enough of the games. I asked you to step out, you did. I asked questions, you're dodging them. This isn't optional. Either you tell me what you do for a living, or I take this down to the station. Renata tilted her head slightly, studying him like she'd studied countless others in a different setting. And what would you write in that report? She asked. Suspicious for driving? Suspicious for being on Dorr Street? Her words landed like ice water down his back. You don't get to mock me, he snapped. I'm not mocking you, she answered plainly. I'm asking whether you're prepared to put your actions on paper. Because I assure you, once you do, it won't vanish into a drawer. That was the moment Ketteridge noticed the badge she pulled slowly from her blazer pocket. Not the gold shield of a patrol officer like him, but the dark leather case of something higher, heavier. She held it up between them, letting the streetlight catch it. Dr. Renata Hollis, she said evenly, Chief of Internal Affairs, Toledo Division. For a long moment, the world around them seemed to pause. The neighbor across the street froze mid-record, his phone still pointed in their direction. Even the faint hum of a car passing in the distance felt muffled compared to the silence that wrapped around the two of them. Ketteridge blinked, his mouth opening but no sound coming out. His throat was dry. His chest tightened. This wasn't just some lawyer who memorized lines. This wasn't a random driver bluffing. This was the person officers whispered about behind closed doors, the one with the authority to review their reports, their body cam footage, their complaints. You're with Internal Affairs? His words cracked in the middle. Renata didn't answer the question. She simply held her badge steady, her eyes fixed on his. I don't carry this for show. I carry it because accountability is my responsibility. Tonight, you've given me more work than I planned to have. Ketteridge felt heat rising in his ears. His hands went slack at his sides. All the lines he'd rehearsed over the years, commands, warnings, the clipped tone that usually silenced drivers, none of them worked now. He stumbled for footing. Look, maybe I came off a little strong. People expect us to be careful, you know? Neighborhood watch has been jumpy. I can see how this looks. Renata slipped the badge back into her blazer with calm precision. It doesn't just look this way. It is this way. The words hit harder than a shout. I didn't mean... You did, she cut in, her tone even but sharp enough to stop him cold. And you said it yourself. You don't see a lot of people like me here after dark. That wasn't caution. That was bias. And bias, behind a badge, turns dangerous. Ketteridge shifted on his feet, searching for a way out, but every exit was blocked. Her words weren't angry, but they were final, each one stacking like evidence on a desk. The neighbor across the street lowered his phone slightly, whispering something to the woman now standing next to him. Even from a distance, Ketteridge could feel the weight of their eyes, the knowledge that his performance had turned into exposure. Renata straightened her blazer and looked him square in the eye. This stop is over. I'll be filing my own report. If you'd like, you can add your version, though I suspect it will read differently from the video already captured tonight. His stomach dropped. The body cam. He had clicked it on automatically when the stop began, barely thinking about it. Now it was his own undoing. Every clipped word, every baseless command, every pause where she asked for justification, it was all there. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words clung to his throat like dry paper. The authority he'd leaned on his whole career wasn't holding him up anymore. Renata's voice softened, though it carried no mercy. You still have a choice, officer. You can recognize the harm in what you've done tonight and change. Or you can double down and watch accountability catch up to you sooner than you expect. Her words settled between them, not as a threat, but as a fact he couldn't argue with. But the night wasn't finished. What followed after she left the curb would prove that this single stop was only the beginning. Ketteridge felt like the pavement beneath his boots was shifting, each second making it harder to keep his balance. His cruiser still pulsed with red and blue, throwing color across Renata's calm face while exaggerating every twitch of his own. His training manuals had never prepared him for this, the moment where the power flipped and the badge on the other side outranked his own. He cleared his throat, his voice cracking slightly. Chief Hollis, look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Renata didn't let him finish. There wasn't a wrong foot. There was a wrong stop. That's a distinction you'll want to remember. Her tone wasn't raised, but the way she said it carried more weight than any reprimand he'd ever received in his career. He shifted, trying to salvage his posture. I wasn't trying to disrespect you. I was just doing what I thought was right. People around here? Renata interrupted, her eyebrow raised. Or people who don't look like they belong around here? Ketteridge froze, his mouth opening and closing without sound. The question left no room for retreat. She pulled a small notebook from her purse and began writing. The sound of the pen scratching across paper seemed louder than his radio, louder than the hum of passing cars. Each stroke cut into him, like she was chiseling the night into permanence. What are you writing? He asked, his voice thinner now. The details, Renata replied. Your words, your actions, the time, the location, the reason you gave for the stop. If we can call it a reason. For the first time all night, his breathing quickened. He wasn't just worried about tonight anymore. He was picturing the next roll call at the station, the whispers in the locker room, the summons to the captain's office. Internal Affairs wasn't some distant department anymore. It was standing right in front of him, recording his every misstep. He tried again. "Chief Hollis, I'm asking for a chance to explain myself." "You've been explaining yourself for the last 20 minutes, Renata said, eyes still on her notes, "and the record isn't in your favor." She closed the notebook with a soft snap and slipped it back into her purse. Then she looked directly at him, her calm cutting deeper than shouting ever could. "Accountability doesn't begin when you're caught. It begins the moment you put on that uniform. Tonight, you forgot that." Ketteridge's throat burned. He wanted to say something, anything, that might soften what had already been etched into her memory, but the words came out broken. I didn't mean for it to go like this." Renata studied him for a long moment, then adjusted her blazer and stepped back toward her car. "Few people ever mean it," she said quietly. Her words struck him harder than if she had yelled. He felt stripped bare, every layer of authority peeled back until all that remained was a man exposed for what he had done. Renata opened her car door, slid inside, and rested her hands on the wheel again. Before starting the engine, she looked once more at Ketteridge. "You'll see me again, officer, but it won't be here on the street." With that, the engine purred to life, and the sedan pulled smoothly away from the curb. The flashing lights reflected on its glossy surface until it turned the corner and disappeared. The silence that followed was suffocating. The neighbor across the street finally lowered his phone and went back inside. The porch lights blinked off one by one. The only thing left was Ketteridge, standing in the glow of his cruiser, the weight of the badge on his chest now feeling like iron, pressing him into the ground. He walked back to his car, each step slower than the last. Sliding into the driver's seat, he stared at the body cam still blinking red on his vest. The footage was there. The evidence was locked in, and nothing he could say would erase it. For the first time in years, the silence inside his cruiser felt unbearable. He gripped the steering wheel, staring at the empty street ahead. But what awaited him at the precinct would make this night feel like only the beginning of his reckoning. The next morning, Ketteridge walked into the Toledo Police Department headquarters with his stomach knotted. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Renata's calm face staring back at him, heard her voice slicing through his excuses. He had hoped, maybe, just maybe, she would let it go. But deep down, he knew she wouldn't. The moment he stepped through the glass doors, he felt the shift in the air. Conversations dipped, then resumed in hushed tones. A few officers glanced at him before quickly looking away. That was the first sign. The story had already started to spread. At roll call, his captain, Arthur Mendez, stood at the front of the room, arms crossed. The usual briefing about patrol assignments was shorter than usual. Then Mendez's eyes cut toward Ketteridge. "Officer Ketteridge," the captain said, his voice clipped. "Stay behind when the others leave." The room went still for a beat. Then the shuffle of boots and papers filled the silence as the other officers filed out. A few threw side glances at him, some curious, some smug. Everyone loved when the loudest guy in the room finally got checked. When the door shut, Mendez didn't waste time. "What the hell were you thinking last night?" Ketteridge straightened, his voice tight. "I was doing my job, sir. Suspected vehicle in a neighborhood with recent—" "Stop." Mendez's hand cut through the air. "I've already reviewed the preliminary report from Chief Hollis." The name landed like a hammer. Ketteridge's face heated. Mendez leaned forward on the desk, his eyes hard. "You pulled over the Chief of Internal Affairs without probable cause. You ordered her out of the car. You tried to search her vehicle and questioned her like she was a suspect. Do you realize what that means for you?" Ketteridge swallowed hard. "Sir, I didn't know who she was. If I had—" "That's exactly the point," Mendez barked. "You didn't know who she was, and you treated her like that. What do you think that says about how you treat everyone else?" The words stung because they were true. Ketteridge's record wasn't spotless. Too many complaints of attitude during stops, a handful of written reprimands for unnecessary escalation. Nothing had ever stuck hard enough to derail his career, but now those incidents weren't just whispers. They were patterns, and Renata Hollis was the one drawing the line between them. Mendez let the silence stretch before he spoke again. "She's filing an official inquiry. That means your body cam, your report, the neighbor's phone video, everything will be reviewed. You're on desk duty until further notice." Ketteridge's chest caved. Desk duty. That was the first step before suspension. He tried to hold his ground. "Captain, I can explain myself. I can make it right." Mendez slammed his palm on the desk. "The time to make it right was on the street. You think Hollis is going to brush this off? She's built her career on holding us accountable, and now you've handed her the perfect case." The door creaked open, and the sergeant on duty peeked in. "Captain, Chief Hollis is here to see you." Ketteridge's stomach dropped. Renata stepped inside, dressed in a navy suit, her expression unreadable. She carried a folder tucked under her arm and nodded politely to Mendez before glancing briefly at Ketteridge. That glance alone sent a wave of heat crawling up his neck. "Mendez," she said, her tone businesslike, "I'll need a private room to go over the footage. We'll also need access to his prior complaint records." Ketteridge felt his throat close. Prior complaints. She was digging. Mendez gestured to a conference room down the hall. "All set for you." Renata gave a curt nod and turned back to Ketteridge, holding his gaze for just a second. "Officer, I hope you understand. This isn't personal. This is about conduct. And the badge you wear doesn't protect you from it. It makes you accountable to it." She turned and walked down the hall, the door closing softly behind her. Ketteridge sank into the nearest chair, his head in his hands. His fellow officers passed by outside the glass, some sneaking looks, some whispering. He could feel the walls closing in. Everything he had built, his authority, his reputation, the years he'd put into wearing that uniform, suddenly felt fragile, like it could shatter with a single report. And deep down, he knew it wasn't just last night that would haunt him. It was every stop before it. Every word he had spoken in the same sharp, dismissive tone. Every decision he had justified without real cause. They were all coming back now, pulled into the light by the one person in the department who couldn't be intimidated. But what Renata would say in her final reflection later would echo far beyond the walls of that station. 2 days later, the conference room at the Toledo Police Department was filled with a tense quiet. A long table stretched between the officers who had been called in and the woman who now sat at the head of it. Dr. Renata Hollis looked over the documents spread before her, her pen resting lightly against the folder. On the other side, Officer Brian Ketteridge sat rigid, his palms sweating against the wood. She began without theatrics. "I want to make one thing clear," Renata said, her tone steady but pointed. "What happened on Dorr Street wasn't just about one stop. It was about a culture of behavior that festers when authority goes unchecked. Last night was only the most recent example of that." Ketteridge shifted, his chest tight. "Chief Hollis, with all respect, She held up a hand. "Respect is shown through actions, officer, not words. If you respected the people you swore to protect, you wouldn't have stopped me in the first place, and you wouldn't have spoken the way you did." The words sliced sharper than any punishment. Around the table, a few officers avoided eye contact, staring down at their notes. Some looked grim. Some looked almost relieved, as if someone had finally said what needed saying. Renata leaned forward. "When you stop someone without cause, when you speak from bias instead of evidence, you not only betray the uniform, you betray every officer who works with integrity. You put a crack in the very foundation of trust that policing is built on." Her eyes swept the room, and for a moment it felt like she wasn't just talking to Ketteridge, but to everyone sitting there. And those cracks spread. People lose faith. They stop calling us when they need help. They stop believing justice is possible. That's what your behavior costs us. Ketteridge's throat burned. He wanted to defend himself, to insist he was only trying to protect the neighborhood, but the words felt hollow. Deep down, he knew she was right. He had pulled people over like that countless times before, and no one had ever held him accountable. Until now. Renata's voice softened slightly, but the steel remained. "This department doesn't need officers who cling to authority like a weapon. It needs officers who understand authority is borrowed from the people, not owned. Every badge you wear, every command you give, it's all borrowed trust. Break it, and you don't just lose your power, you lose your purpose." The silence that followed carried weight. No one moved, no one shuffled papers. Even the air conditioner's low hum seemed distant. Finally, Renata closed the folder. "This inquiry will continue. Officer Ketteridge, you'll be reassigned pending the outcome. But whether you wear this uniform next week, next month, or never again depends on whether you decide to change. And change isn't a speech. It's a choice you repeat every single day. She rose from her seat, smoothing her blazer, and for a moment she looked at Ketteridge, not as an adversary, but as a man staring at a crossroads. Remember this: authority without accountability is just abuse, and abuse has no place in this department. With that, she left the room. The door closed softly behind her, leaving a silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Ketteridge sat still, the weight of her words pressing down harder than any suspension. For the first time in his career, he felt stripped of the armor he had built around himself. He wasn't just an officer facing discipline. He was a man being forced to see himself through the eyes of those he had stopped, questioned, and dismissed. Later that night, sitting alone in his small apartment, he replayed her words over and over. Not just the criticism, but the truth embedded in them. He realized accountability wasn't about punishment. It was about honesty. And the question now was whether he had the courage to face his own. Renata, meanwhile, drove home quietly. She had handled cases bigger than this, officers with rap sheets longer than their service records. But this moment reminded her why she took the role in the first place. Every time she stood firm, every time she refused to bend under excuses, she knew she wasn't just disciplining officers, she was defending the trust of the people who lived on streets like Dorr. As she pulled into her driveway, she whispered to herself the line she had carried for years: "Justice isn't loud, it's steady." That was the lesson the night left behind, not just for one officer, but for anyone who had ever carried authority without remembering the weight of it. And maybe, for those listening now, it's a reminder too. In life, we all hold some measure of power over friends, family, coworkers, strangers. What matters is whether we use it to lift others or press them down. Because authority without accountability, that's not strength. That's weakness disguised as power. So if you've been listening to this story, ask yourself, what kind of strength do you carry? And what kind of legacy do you leave behind when no one is watching? Thank you for staying with me through this story. If you believe accountability matters, and if you want to hear more stories like this one, make sure to subscribe.